Welcome to a very, very special live edition of Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Thursday, September 28th. I'm your host, Tom Moore. The Maryland game is in 9 days. The game against Michigan is in 58 days. Tony Gerdeman, more than 9 days or more than 7 days means, hey, it must be the week off for Ohio State. Never a week off here, though, in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Got to talk to 3 Buckeyes on Wednesday, talked to Kyle McCord, talked to Emeka Egbuka, talked to Cody Simon, 3 players who have had relatively eventful days on Saturday. I guess let's start with Cody Simon. He was the first one to come out. We'll start, seems only fair. You know, we have talked now several times about the fact that we didn't talk about the fact that he made this incredible play to get a 4th down stop on Sam Hartman. And, you know, he was asked about just that play in general and his, you know, he was doing one thing and then he had to very quickly shift modes to do something else and do it very quickly before Sam Hartman crossed the first down line.
Yeah, and being on the field, like you're on the field, but you don't know exactly where you are on the field. And he talked about not knowing exactly where he was and where Sam Hartman needed to get, but at some point you've got to make the decision to leave the coverage and go get the quarterback. And he couldn't have made a better choice at that point, because if you leave too soon, then you get thrown over the top, unless there's some linemen downfield. But that's not something that he's really focused on, that sort of thing. He's just either, I've got my guy and I've got this guy running to me. So he made the right decision and just stopped him in time.
The officials never see the lineman downfield, so I wouldn't expect a linebacker to do that.
One of the interesting things that I liked about just his entire day was somebody asked him, you know, how do you stay ready, or how can you handle just being thrown in there? And he said, like, I am prepared to play every single play. You have to do that in practice. You have to be ready and prepared to play as if you're going to play every single play, because you don't know exactly when you're going to get thrown in there. And that's one of those instances. Now, I think this past week, they had an idea that they were going to go more 3 linebackers. I don't think he knew he was going to go and play in place of Steel Chambers at times. That was something new. But the fact that he was prepared for whatever allowed whatever to happen in Ohio State's favor.
Something else that probably helped him get prepared is he sounds like he has a much better grasp of the Jim Knowles defense right now. And, you know, he talked about it. I mean, what did he say? Like, he understands what Knowles is thinking at all times. You asked him about that.
Yeah, well, I did ask if it's a scary place, and he's like, yeah, it's not really scary, but it is something that we've talked about all year long, being in the same defense 2 years in a row, and just having a better idea of not just what the defense does, what you do in the defense, but what Jim Knowles wants to see in that defense and what he's thinking, what his tendencies may be. But the ability to communicate things in a very quick manner allows them to do so many different things.
All right, we're going to communicate very quickly with a super chat.
A very generous super chat from Treasure the Torah. This is just a little something special to Kevin, Tom, and Tony. Much love and respect from Treasure the Torah. Love and respect Buckeye Nation. Something tells me we're definitely making the playoffs this year. Go Buckeyes.
Well, thank you very much.
You.
Always appreciate it. Always love seeing familiar names in the chat as well. I was kind of looking over Kevin's shoulder as he was streaming the interviews earlier, and I was like, oh, I know them. Always good to see you guys back there, and appreciate everyone's support. Okay, let's derail for a moment. I was thinking about this earlier. The fact that Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State got through the non-conference portion of the schedule unbeaten, and Michigan has 2.5 losable games left if you include Maryland. Penn State has maybe just 2 losable games left, Ohio State and Michigan. Ohio State has a couple, and then, you know, the Penn State-Michigan games, maybe, I mean, Maryland, theoretically, that'd be more of a concern in College Park. Maybe Wisconsin, you know, that I think is week after Penn State. That's a little bit of a concern. Maybe Purdue, just because Ross-Ade Stadium is haunted. But, you know, when you look at those teams getting through, and you look at Ohio State having a really signature road win now, it sure feels like the Big Ten East is in line for, if anyone was going to get 2 teams in the playoff, it sure feels like the Big Ten East has put itself in a pretty decent position to be the one that gets 2 teams in this year.
It's going to be crazy when it's 2 Big Ten teams and 2 Pac-12 teams in the playoffs, Tom.
Man, I got to tell you, a year without an SEC team in the playoff, like
A year with no winter?
I kind of want to see that just to see what happens. You hear the term end of the world thrown around a lot. But down in the Sweet Tea Belt, that literally might be viewed as the end of the world.
They may just hold their own playoffs.
Yeah,
And then crown Alabama. Everybody gets a national championship trophy. That's
the Fort Sumter Cup for the secession trophy.
the way the Pac-12 is going right now is crazy. But I think you're right. These three Big Ten East teams, it's hard for me to imagine, I guess, one of them going undefeated through this. It feels like they're going to knock each other off, and then we're right back to square one. And we have seen the Big Ten change rules midstream before. The COVID year when everything was, malleable. Who would object? Who would object? Not even the Big Ten West would object. And if you said this year, the Big Ten West is not invited to the Big Ten championship game.
Well, here's the thing. This is a year when the ACC has already done that. The Pac-12 has already done that. So, I think if you look right now, I think Washington and Oregon are probably the two best teams in the Pac-12 right now, probably ahead of USC because those teams both employ defensive coordinators. So that puts them in a little bit of an advantage. If those two teams play, they play in a few weeks, I think. In the old model, they would go play USC or whoever comes out of the South. Now, those two teams might play again. So you might have, if the same team wins twice, well, if USC loses a couple games, if one of those teams loses a couple games, you're only getting one out of the Pac-12. The ACC, same deal. Florida State, I assume Florida State must still play Miami this year. They might play Miami again in the ACC championship game, which would, how beautiful would it be that after years and years and years of setting up the division solely that you had those teams, they never played, and then the first year they don't have divisions, then they play. That would be magnificent. But either way, you're talking about the fact that the Big Ten East champion would play the Big Ten West champion. That's probably good for everyone in the Big Ten East because then you don't have a team taking that second loss potentially. So just a thought on that. I was thinking about that while I was walking the dog this morning. Boy, this is sure setting up well for the Big Ten to potentially get two teams in again this year.
Yeah, very much so. And we talked about that possibility early in the season or before the year just because, and I don't know that we've really talked about Penn State being one of those two teams, and maybe we should spend more time talking about them moving forward.
Well, I mean, they just made Iowa's offense look bad, and not just anyone can do that, Tony.
Not just anyone. But almost.
Almost anyone. All right, so now, so thank you to Treasure the Torah again for that very generous super chat. We appreciate it. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. Let's talk a little bit about Kyle McCord. Because Kyle McCord, most of the folks in our audience probably watch Kyle McCord on TV on Saturday night. Sounds like Kyle McCord went home and watched Kyle McCord on TV on Sunday, and that sounds like a really, like almost an out-of-body experience for him to do that.
Absolutely had to be, and he did talk a little bit about how weird it was. And he sits down and he mentions that it's like he said he had butterflies watching because you don't know how it's going to end. And it reminded me of every year as a kid when I would watch Wizard of Oz. Never really sure that Dorothy and everybody's going to make it home and
finish the drill, flying monkeys,
that sort of thing. It's like, everything is so scary, but like he lived through it, and he's still like, that's why I asked him like, what's going through your mind when you're watching it and you throw that almost interception, and he's like, well, it was a bad read, and things like that. But it was also interesting when he said, watching it on TV, everything moves so quickly, so fast. But when you're on the field and you're going through it, everything is so much slower. He's like, I could hear myself breathing. Just everything is. That is where like the adrenaline and it kind of slows time down because you are so focused and you're so prepared. They talk about that, like firefighters that rescuing people or mothers lifting cars off of children when everything around you is moving slower because you're just firing on all of your cylinders properly. And yes, he was a hero rescuing children from beneath a car in Notre Dame. But just that, knowing what's happened, you've lived through it, and now you're watching it from an entirely new perspective, and you're kind of watching it through the broadcasters, watching it through the fans. Because another thing, when you talk to players, they don't necessarily hear the fans when things are going on, when the game is going on. It did remind me of one time I was talking to Brian Roll about his 2-point conversion return to win against Navy.
Yep.
And he told me, like, he was like floating above watching himself run it back, like live. And it was, that was like an actual out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
This was just I'm going to watch it on the DVR later experience.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me because you hear young guys talk about, freshman year to sophomore year, the game starts slowing down for you. If the game's slowing down to that point where you're getting it in like super slow-mo, that's probably a good indication of where Kyle McCord sort of is in his progression. And how do guys always talk about whenever we ask guys, how do you get better at that? How do you get better at recognizing stuff? What do they always say?
Experience.
Watching film. Watching film was the answer we're looking for. We have some lovely parting gifts.
Both experience and watching film. The experience of watching film.
The experience of watching film, yes. And what do we hear people... This is going to be, Tony, I'm going to lead you into this one. What do we always hear people talk about? How much Kyle McCord does?
Buys vowels.
Experience. Sorry. Yes, watching film. I mean, Kyle McCord is the guy who... You heard this about C.J. Stroud. You heard this about Justin Fields. Yeah. First guy in, last guy out.
Watching film in the hot tub.
Watching film. I mean, who was it last week that talked about, was it Emeka? Marv. One of them talked about, you'll see, might have been Donovan Jackson. Anyway, one of the players on the football team talked last week about the fact that you'll see Kyle McCord sitting in the hot tub watching film, and you'll tell him, like, you got to go home, and he'll just pretend not to hear you.
You're pruning up. You can't even swipe anymore.
So, that's just reps. That is how you get better. That is how the game slows down, and so it makes sense the game's sort of slowing down.
And everybody talked about how Mecca talked about it. Not to move on, but this is kind of in that same vein. Like, you're only going to get a certain number of reps for each of these plays throughout the week, and it may be 1 rep, it may be 2 reps. You may be watching a mental rep. You may be watching somebody else take that rep, but it all has to count because anytime that play can happen during a game. And so you need to be paying attention. You need to be focused, the ultimate focus on whatever is happening, even if you're not out there running that play, because that play is being practiced for a reason. But there's only so many hours in a work week for these guys to actually get those practices and those plays in. So, like, not everybody's going to get to practice every single play, but they have to be able to run it in a game.
Yeah, and that's something that, we hear guys talk about mental reps all the time when they're injured. Guys talk about mental reps when they're the backup. And, Kyle McCord went through a lot of this year, probably less than normal because they ran the 2-field thing during fall camp. But, all those reps are precious. And that's why, a couple weeks ago we were talking about the back end. You probably need to make a decision because the reps are the ones, those are very precious. So making the most of those is big. Hey, speaking of wide receivers, just a quick update from here inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. We had said earlier in the week, someone had asked us, what's the latest on Marvin Harrison? And we had said, if we don't see him in there working on the Monarch machine, it'll be a big red flag. Good news, he was in here working on the Monarch machine, just standing there catching passes, but was him and Xavier Johnson and Reese Stocksdale, and they were all just standing there, so it wasn't like everyone else was running and Marv wasn't. He did not have like a, enormous walking boot on his right ankle or anything like that. Looked pretty fine to me, so, especially with a week off this weekend, obviously that is, you saw him come back. You wondered if that was adrenaline and painkillers and whatever to get him back out there. But, the fact that he's out here 4 days later, that's a very good sign on an area where I'm sure Ohio State fans had a little bit of lingering concern.
Yeah, and I guarantee there was some adrenaline. Then watching them walk off the field, Xavier Johnson, after the game, was helping Marvin walk off the field. He's obviously under his own power, but doing a little leaning on the blocko as well. It's always interesting watching, because it's usually the same guys, and sometimes Emeka will be in there with them, but watching Marvin Harrison and Xavier Johnson feeding the Monarch machine for Reese Stocksdale, who has been injured all season. Yeah. And yet they're still helping him, work on that. And today they were working on low throws, which seems like the most annoying throws to work on, like right down worm burners at your feet trying to catch those. The machine is amazing. Just, tell it what you want. And, but it's just cool to see like a future NFL #1 draft pick, a future current captain of the Ohio State football team, and Reese Stocksdale, a walk-on who's been injured and isn't playing, but they're still working with him as if it was Emeka, Julian, and Marvin.
And if you want to see a little bit of video, I just tweeted out like 20 seconds. Not tweeted, Instagrammed out about 20 seconds of that video. If you look for Buckeye Huddle on Instagram, you can watch a little bit of Marvin Harrison catching balls from the Monarch machine. As I pulled out my phone to double check our Instagram handle, I did also notice, hey, I forgot to ask you about Kyle McCord noticing, hey, Notre Dame only has 10 guys on the field.
That was
him figuring out. I bet I know at least vaguely, what we're going to do on this final play.
Yeah, that was interesting because he was asked, when did you notice it? And they noticed it as they're getting the play call in and as they're getting ready to run the roll to the right. And then he's thinking, well, hopefully they notice that upstairs, that Ohio State will notice that and then call the right play for that. And that's exactly what happened. And the fact that the quarterback notices it and nobody for Notre Dame notices it. And Ohio State even brings in, after that incompletion, they bring in Chip Trainum. So Notre Dame could have substituted. They would have been allowed to substitute.
Oh, I forgot about that. You're right.
And that's why, like, every excuse, the only thing that makes any sense is the worst possible answer is that nobody on Notre Dame realized it.
Yeah, because we had talked on the Wednesday episode of Buckeye Weekly, we talked about rewatching the game and just how much time there was between that second to last play and the last play in offense for Ohio State, and how I could have run from the sideline over in the time that we're talking about, and how they the idea that, well, they didn't want to get an offsides penalty didn't make any sense, and I had forgotten that they subbed, so the refs would have held up the game to allow them to bring in a guy, yet no one noticed. Either they don't know the rules of football or no one noticed, and oh boy, that's...
neither is a good answer.
Well, neither is a good answer. At least it wasn't a consequential play. I think that's the...
True. I mean, they stopped them the first time.
They did. Did you see the tweet that was from the Tennessee State game where Notre Dame had 10 guys on the field for a play, and someone basically said, well, they have to get this cleaned up before they play a tougher opponent. Did they get it cleaned up, Tony?
No.
Interesting. Anything else from Emeka Egbuka that was notable to you?
Just the amount of he was another guy talking about the mental reps and that play, that 3rd and 19, is something that they do in walkthroughs on Fridays. They don't really get to run at full speed, and so just being able to execute in full speed in that situation, something that you just literally walk through, and it may be in a hotel room, or wherever that you're out here, you're not really doing anything full speed, but the play, what it looks like. And then Emeka also talked about how when you're running plays, you're not always going to get the defense that you expect or the coverage that you expect, so you have to find a way to get by your guy, to get to your spot where you're supposed to be, where your quarterback is going to be throwing the ball. And that was a play where they both kind of saw the same thing and trusted each other that the other guy saw it as well.
Yeah, and you see the wrong version of that all the time. When that works like it is, it's like, oh, I'm sure that's just how they drew it up. When you see, when you hear the announcer say, oh, they weren't on the same page there, and one guy runs an out and one guy runs an up, and or one throws an out, and the other guy's running
Terrible
a streak.
throw.
Yeah, it's like, oh boy, that was terrible. And you never know who did the thing that they were or were not supposed to do. That's watching a lot of film. That's repping stuff over and over again and just sort of knowing. So, Kevin, do we have any questions that we want to get to?
Yeah, we got, it's 2:19, so we got to go about 10 minutes before we get thrown out of here. Odysseus, should Ohio State have run more rub routes and crossing routes earlier, like the one to Fleming on 4th and 7?
So rub routes and crossing routes, those work best against man coverage. And Notre Dame was playing a lot more man than I was expecting.
Yeah, and it was more than Emeka said they were expecting. Like, the only time they weren't in man, basically, were 2nd and 3rd and long. We have wondered about the play calling in general, and you go in with your own expectations and the game plan with those expectations, and then you adjust throughout. And as every time Ohio State plays somebody, they see stuff that they haven't shown, that program hasn't shown before, that defense hasn't shown before, because that's what you have to pull out against Ohio State. But yeah, I mean, I think any of those mesh routes, those inside routes, they always, not that they always work, but they seem to work pretty well, especially when you get guys moving left and right. And yeah, I wouldn't have objected to that. So yeah.
Next up.
Oh, we just had a super chat come in. Jumps to the top of the line. Mike Farino, is there a reason that play wasn't run to the end zone? It seems like Emeka had been in the end zone. He likely scores. I'm no expert, but there could have been something I missed.
I think that might have been, there was a defender behind him. So I think that might have been just, I think, whoever
Soft
the
zone.
safety was. Yeah, the safety's behind him. You know, also recognizing, hey, this line here on the field, where the little slashy things are, that is a line of some consequence, and I'm not going to let you know. I'm not going to offer you the opportunity to get 3 yards past that. So I'm going to guess that was a decision based on where the defender behind him was. You settle down, you find a spot, you catch it, and then you've got a chance to run 2 plays from not very far.
Yeah, and that throw was in the air before Emeka was even looking for it, I believe. It was Kyle throwing to a spot where the defender wasn't going to be in time, and that the receiver would be in time. And if you throw that into the end zone, there's 2 guys there. That, you know, it's not likely to be completed.
Frank, I was hard on McCord and I was dead wrong. The kid showed heart.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't perfect, as we said. You know, had that throw in on that last drive that I think he said, you know, what he said on the field. If he repeated it in front of us, Jerry Emig, the SID, would probably not be thrilled with him. I'm guessing it was like, hamburgers or something like that. You know, wasn't perfect. Sam Hartman wasn't perfect either, and Sam Hartman is, you know, that was his 50th, I think, career start, and it was Kyle McCord's 5th. So for a game that a lot of the pregame analysis, rightly or wrongly, and this is probably a little bit of an oversimplification in terms of how people are looking at it, but a lot of the pregame analysis was, well, Notre Dame has a veteran quarterback, and Ohio State has this inexperienced guy, and, you know, in a big moment, you got to go with the veteran. Well, the inexperienced guy was the one who came up, and that's, you know, that is that shows you a lot about the fact that if the moment's not too big for you, you've got enough talent around you that all you have to do is do your job. You don't have to be a hero. You have to just be able to do your job, and he showed you he could do his job.
Kyle talked about the first 2 incompletions on that drive, and then once he got that first completion in, he knew they were going to be okay. And the players always said, we knew we were going to go down and score. But just getting that first that first little confidence boost in there. But he also talked about visualizing these moments makes it easier to actually get through them and accomplish what you're supposed to accomplish. And just all of the off-field visualization outside of the study, just like that sort of thing that goes into these things, I don't think people really, that's nothing you ever see. So it's like it doesn't exist, but it exists for all of these guys as they're trying to accomplish the highest levels of college football.
Well, and when you're talking about visualization, you're not talking about, you know, like there were probably a bunch of 7-year-olds around the state of Ohio pretending to be Kyle McCord on Sunday afternoon and leading the Ohio State team with the invisible players around them down the yard for a touchdown. This is like sports psychology stuff. They do a lot of mental coaching and that kind of stuff here as well, which is that's far beyond just like, well, I'm going to close my eyes and pretend, and we'll see. You know, I'm the big hero of the game again. It's way more involved than that, but that's all stuff that goes into this.
Tyler, what do you think the defense could improve on other than sacks?
What could the defense improve on other than sacks?
You know, I think the stopping the run is one thing that they've done well, but they gave up 176 yards to Notre Dame. Just staying more gap sound, I think we saw some issues with that. Lost leverage a couple of times, but overall, like, they have the safeties back there to help them as well, so they were able to make up for some of those mistakes. I just think just being a little bit more fundamentally sound on where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to be doing at linebacker. And again, it's 2 guys, but you know, you throw Sonny Styles in there, you throw Cody Simon in there as well. But this is a very good offensive line that they were going against. They were pushed and they were tested, and it took all of them to answer that bell. And teammates are picking up slack for teammates, and I think that's the most important thing to take away from this one. But overall, I would just say just that fundamental aspect of gaps and things like that.
And you know, they gave up a bunch of passing yards to the tight end, to Mayer,
Not
Mayer.
Mitchell Evans,
sorry. To Mitchell Evans. They gave a bunch of yards to Mayer last year. Don't correct me. Mitchell Evans, I think he was 7 for 75 or something like that. You know, there's areas in the defense where you got to get better, but the running obviously. But you know, to your point, the safeties are back there. and when the safeties are back there, stuff didn't get past them. So that was really encouraging. I think that's like a B+, A- kind of grade. I think for the Ohio State defense.
Did you say third downs? You know, they Notre Dame was 5 of 10 third downs.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm ranting about the lack of possessions, there's always the response: tell the defense to get off the field. And then there is some truth to that. Get off the field, 50%. Third downs, not great, but you know that's last year with the baking into 5 big plays. The questions were like, why not just the bend but don't break, force an offense to go down the field. And we're seeing what's happened now that they're doing it. They're giving up 10 points a game to this point.
And they really didn't break very much because they had the missed field goal. They got to stop on the plus side of the 50. They had 2 times when they stopped them on 4th and 1. So they really are bending but not breaking. We think we have time for one more before we wrap it up.
We'll go here to Condi's. They need to run more routes like the Fleming one with a faster player.
Well, and we just talked about the rub routes, the mesh routes, things like that, running across the middle. Julian Fleming is plenty fast, but I'm never going to object to more crossing routes, more mesh routes, things like that, where you've just got defense and offense going different ways. That play, throwing short of the sticks, and then Kyle McCord talked about, I don't remember the exact word for it, but they talk about those throws where they have to be perfect and they have to be leading the receiver so that he can continue in a direction towards the first down. Because if you're going to throw short of the sticks and you throw it behind a guy, you've lost.
Yeah.
And so that has to be pinpoint pass, and that going in when you throw this, because that's just where the route is. And then I was surprised that Julian Fleming got tackled as quickly as he did on that one, because he's a very strong guy. He's a strong runner. I have no problem with him running crossing routes and getting involved and things like that. But, boy, that was a close one.
It was a close one. And I do wonder if you're going to see them mix in more of those kind of crossing routes or mesh routes, because you want them. That's a route that can force. I mean, Don Brown learned this lesson the hard way in 2018. That's a lesson that can. That's a route combination that can force you to play zone. And if you play zone, then you've got guys settling into zone and finding spots in the zone, and maybe making it a little harder to double someone like Marvin Harrison or Emeka Ibuka or something like that. So, all right, so that will wrap it up here. We are going to get booted out of here in just a minute, but wanted to thank you guys all for joining us in the chat and joining us for the live interviews earlier today. We always appreciate having you guys here along with us, and make sure you join us as well at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Fun, boy, a lot of stuff to talk about this week. A lot of active stuff on the board. Football, football for the Buckeyes, but also active pro football chat, active hockey Blue Jackets chat.
Men's basketball media day was this week.
Men's basketball media day was this week. Tony was there. Lots of interesting stuff from Chris Holtman and so the new look Buckeyes this year. So lots of good stuff there, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. If you're watching this live on YouTube, we would appreciate it if you hit that thumbs up, help other folks find these shows. And then if you're listening on your podcast platform of choice, leave us a 5-star rating and review, which will do the same. It only takes a second on your part and will help us out a lot. So that will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.